Tender Strands by Martin Dempsey. Chapter 13. Auxiliary. It was Cavill's day off. Any day could be upon his degree at this point. The garage, truth be told, effectively ran itself, with the bulk of the administration being divided between himself, the drivers, and whoever was covering the desk. The building maintenance was taken care of by the site manager he'd hired, and the off-site accountant and solicitor took care of all the finances and the legal issues, including contracts. Much of the administration Cavill did revolved around helping keep the place tidy, organising paperwork to be somewhere, and okaying bills and decisions making. Although he wouldn't admit it to himself, Cavill was basically the financial backer and guarantor to the enterprise and simply turned up to help out. In effect, he only had dealing with the garage in person at this point to add shape to his weeks and give him an outlet to feel productive. His mother, when she was still kept in semi-regular contact with her, used to quiz him as to how it was running. She had previously criticised him for having 3 managers when he could take up at least one role himself, needled him about opening up a second site, possibly starting a franchise, and how she'd heard about something called apps, which were, she heard, a threat to the cab industry, and what was he going to do to protect himself from it, and that he should start one or buy one. Cavill didn't bother mentioning that most of the business his drivers got at this point was from the civil service and local council in the form of officers who wanted to travel to and from meetings or conventions in a secure, easily auditable manner, or day trips for those who needed them, or even collections of individuals in one of the 2 minibuses. Cavill was undedicated and unfocused, but he was able to spot low-hanging fruit and had turned coasting into an art form. It was a time of the day Cavill found pleasant. He'd taken a run, breaking away for a short while from the tarmac and concrete of his usual surroundings, and gone on a circular route through several of the city's parks. He'd stopped off at the nearest store and gathered 2 shopping bags full of oats, string beans, mushrooms, peppers, tofu, dark chocolate, and coffee for him, and eggs, sausages, black pudding, cat food, offal, and syrup for them, and 2 large bunches of bananas to share. He'd swept, the hair got everywhere, mopped, they were messy eaters, filled the washing machine, and was now preparing to put on some music and engage in his yoga practice. Cavill, more often than not, had failed to find the time and practice over the last recent weeks. At this time of day, however, most of his new domestic companions tended to be asleep. They still seemed to be growing, which was a thought which deeply troubled him whenever he had it, and one which he fought hard to suppress. On the plus side, it was a relief to be able to use the toilet without an audience of at least one set of 8 quizzical eyes. Cornetto was no trouble, bless him. All he wanted to do was hide and play in his slowly expanding tunnel, occasionally poking his head out to check what was going on. Cavill now and then would spend a few minutes picking lint from his web to keep it clean, whilst Cornetto peeped out at him, Cavill taking the opportunity to ruffle Cornetto's tousled snow-white locks, which Cornetto didn't seem to appreciate. Cornetto was by far the most like Cavill in appearance, if it were not for his body and the ring of eyes around the top of his head, and the way their jaws worked. From the neck up, he could pass for an infant. Arbuckle also required very little attention, hardly ever getting into trouble. He would quite literally just hang out on his web, occasionally running a few laps. Cavill had come back home and caught him in the process of repairing his little domain, or sticking something to it like a label, a bill, or something glittery. Decorating it, Cavill assumed. Sometimes when Cavill walked past and spoke to him, complimented his web, or rhetorically asked how he was doing, he'd look proud and happy, or indicate by moving his forward-facing eyes, the ones with whites, irises, and pupils, one of the recent adornments, and bare his mixture of little white teeth and jagged black fangs, and say, "Look at that!" Of them all, Sooty was by far the most curious, and it made Cavill's skin crawl. He'd be opening his sock drawer to fetch the day's pair, opening a cupboard to get a mug, lifting up the lid of the toilet, and she'd be there, her ivory-coloured, stone-hard, leering face, arched eyebrows, cheekbones sharp to the point of almost being horns, the 8 jet-black eyes in lines of 4 dotted down the sides of her face, her mouth open in a perpetual snarl scream, black teeth hooked like barbs curling back into her mouth. She'd always recall, hunched down onto the tips of her paws, her black oblong thorax with a splash of blood red angled in the air, and let out a faint hissing scream whenever he happened upon her. Unlike Wincy, she'd never actually leapt at Cavill, or even flared her jaws at him, but he felt sure it was because he always made sure to take an authoritative tone with her. "Be good, sooty," he'd command, pointing at her whenever he spotted her lurking in a corner, or as soon as he retained his composure after jumping out of his skin. Wincy was easily the naughtiest. He loved to jump, using his thick, powerful legs to propel himself through the air from surface to surface. Cavill had taken to trying to wear him out before turning in for the night, or else Wincy and Incy would chase around the apartment, knocking things over, thudding against walls and waking him. The light pen which projected a tiny red mouse shape had worked for a while, until Wincy had stopped mid-chase one evening, balled up his legs under him, and with a slowness which Cavill found comical, turned his head to fix at least 4 eyes on Cavill's hand in the small silver projector. Wincy then slowly extended a foreleg to intersect the path of the laser, looked at the red outline projected on his leg, and then looked back at Cavill with a look of slightly wounded dignity, which made Cavill both laugh out loud and feel guilty. To make up for the incident, Wincy got extra eggs in the morning, and were it not impossible to keep still long enough to pick him up, Cavill might even have attempted to pet him. It had dawned on Cavill that the right thing to do, considering that the clutch seemed to be growing and developing, would be to buy rats or mice for them all to chase after, but having been vegan for decades he couldn't bring himself to. Cavill's compromise was now to occasionally run around inside the flat and let Wincy chase after him, cackling and giggling, or throw toys for him to fetch. When he played chase with Wincy, Incy would sometimes join in, but she spent most of her time preening when she wasn't asleep. In the evenings, when Cavill was sitting up in bed, she liked to dance side to side at the foot of the bed for him, her bloom of fluffy peacock feathers on her back flashing back and forth, her kiss curl eyelashes fluttering. Incy had a similar cherubim-shaped type face, and thick curls to Cornetto, but the hair on top of her head was a shock of Marilyn Monroe blonde, shifting to pink and peach at the ruffles around her neck, then blue and turquoise along her back and onto her legs. Unlike Cornetto, all of her eyes were black, stone-like pebbles, only the two in place you'd expect them to be on a child were almond shape and angled upwards. Judy was another matter entirely, a law unto herself. Cavill never saw her move, and she spent most of her time now on the beanbag in the centre of the main room. Only the soft shuffling of her jaws, or the fact that the two of her forward-facing eyes had whites, irises, and pupils, were open and following things around, revealed that she was awake or asleep. As the mid-afternoon slowly moved towards evening, Cavill moved quietly around his flat, listening out for the soft snoring and brushes of Shriller against Shriller as they shuffled their jaws in their sleep. He put on some quiet ambient music that incorporated the sound of lapping waves. It was late autumn. The sun had begun to set and was drifting towards the horizon, red in the sky, the light shining through the windows of his almost furnishless, free main room. The light shone through the lava lamp that they all clearly loved, and Cavill always took care to leave on when he was out. He also left it on when they slept, as it seemed to help them sleep deeper and be less jittery. He also topped up the water in the air humidifier, adding a few drops from his loud tincture, and turned it on, releasing a light fume of bubbling steam into the air. Cavill took a deep lungful of liquid cannabis mixed with tannis root from his vape pen, and exhaled, adding his own second-hand steam to that circling up from the humidifier's pipe. Cavill moved to the centre of the room, rotating his wrists, moving his head forward and back and side to side, rolling back and forth on his toes, circling his knees and shoulders, rotating his hips in a circle. With a deep breath, he reached up and exhaled. In a smooth movement, he bent at the hips to brush the backs of his hands against the floor, bending his knees slightly to do so. And with a deep breath in, he swept his arms up to the ceiling. He repeated the movement multiple times until his deep breaths weren't an effective choice, but a natural reaction to the exertion, and he felt his breathing deepen. He incorporated a deeper bend in the knees, and with each step of his legs folded, completely bringing his butt into his heels at the deepest point. After a few more minutes, Cavill started to incorporate a jumping hop at the top of the arm sweep, further increasing the depth and rapidity of his breath. His eyes moved from the setting sun to the lava lamp, the wax balls inside it moving slowly within its peach, crimson, and golden lit fluid. The wax globes multiplied until 8 hung in the fluid, undulating lightly. At around the same time, the soft snuffles and grunts issuing from the various corners of the apartment ceased. Ready to move into the next stage of his practice, Cavill slowed his movements, and neatly placed his feet side to side, drawing in his navel, folding his shoulder blades back and down, opening his chest, and letting his head rest over his center of gravity. Usually at this point he would let his eyes drift to the horizon, and at this point in the year the sunlight was usually mute enough to allow him to gaze near or even directly at it. Today he found his eyes sliding towards and resting upon the extra-large lava lamp he'd had since university. The sunlight glinted off the gold-painted cap on its top, caressed its sides, and was eclipsed by the globes floating within, effectively casting them in darkness, shadowing them in blackness. Looking directly at the lamp, his gaze soft, his breath hovering between his navel and the sternum. Cavil swept his hands up into the air, meeting his palms above his head, and in the prayer position lowered them level with his heart. Sweeping his arms up again, Cavil stretched as high as he could whilst maintaining his posture and bent forward at the waist, bringing his hip, chest to the thighs, his palms to the floor. Exhaling, he hopped both legs back, riding back on his palms onto his heels, his tailbone pressing towards the ceiling. His back straight, his body forming an inverted V. Breathing in deeply, he then reverted the arch, pressing his hips into the floor, his chest opening up, his head tilting backwards, elbows tucked to his sides. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Incy had woken up and was standing slightly behind him to the left, also looking at the lamp. Cavil exhaled, and as he did, he hopped his feet towards his palms and pressed his hips up, returning to the forward fold posture. Inhaling, Cavil opened up, returning to standing upright, his arms sweeping up again. Wincy softly thudded onto the wall to his right, his Shurilla open, his front teeth poking out from under its snout's top lip and curled up into a smile. Wincy's Shurilla poked forwards towards the lamp, as if trying to point, and he chuckled, his soft, low, throaty chuckle. The sound of balls of styrofoam shifted behind him, suggesting Judy was rousing. They were waking up. That was fine. They were used to Cavil practicing yoga, and if he kept quiet, they might all fall back asleep for a while, and he would prepare their evening meal when he was done, after a shower. Refocusing his thoughts, Cavil mentally prepared to repeat the movement pattern. His arms reached up, his breath deep. Next to him, silently, Incy lifted two of her arms and raised her tail feathers. Cavil's arms swept out to the sides of his palms and touched in prayer posture. As he did, Wincy withdrew his Shurilla, tucking them back under to form a lower jaw to his upper lip, the knuckles of them folding to meet, creating a chin. Cavil, exhaling, swept his arms down to his feet, folding forwards. Between his legs, he noticed that Cornetto had left his tunnel and joined them in the main room. His face was still crumpled a little, like he was sleepy and trying to wake up, and he was tucking his forelegs under his thorax as if trying to rest his forehead on the floor and fall back asleep. Cavil hopped his feet back, his eyes returning to the lamp. In the glass he saw Arbuckle's reflection. He was leaning out, hanging off his web, so he could see into the main room, hopping his legs around to see. Cavil rode back, pushing up his hips. For the first time he noticed Sooty, who was in the corner of the room, almost hidden in shadow. It was only the red on her thorax which caught his eye as she arched her back, lifting her spinners in the air. Cavil shifted his hips forwards, resting them on the floor, horseshoeing his back. The sound of styrofoam shifting behind him suggested Judy was shifting. In the lamp, reflected, Cavil saw that she was rampant again behind him. He could see her reflection over his shoulder, almost large enough now to hold his entire body in her legs. As Cavil reversed the sequence and returned to standing, the sun fully dipped below the horizon, directly behind the lava lamp. The last rays of the sun's light blended with the crimson tones of the lamp, as if being absorbed into it, the solar giving way to the new primary source of illumination within the apartment. Within, 8 black globes floated, suspending, reflecting Cavil's slender body, arms reaching up as if he too was floating, trapped within the lamp as the light slowly faded and leaving him suspended in its darkness.